Welcome to the F50 Woman Podcast, dedicated to sharing stories from a diverse community of women in order to provoke you into a passionate pursuit of life, build unshakable character, and achieve extraordinary things. Now, here is your host, Julia Jack.
She was raised by a working dad and a stay-at-home mom. Driven, she was very competitive and got overly involved in everything. As she grew, she wanted to do something to change the world, but was unsure what exactly that would be. She would grow to become a doctor, and after dealing with patients, promotions, lots of papers, and writing a medical textbook, she quit and decided to start writing medical fiction. It was a long journey with twists and turns. Come in and hear what happened to change the direction of her life at 50. This is Tammy Euliano's story, and she is one smart and highly educated introvert and a transformed F50 woman. Hey, F50 women, thank you for joining us. I am here with Tammy Euliano, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Did I?
You did, yes.
Good. Tammy is a tenured professor. She's got training videos on YouTube that have had over 100,000 views, probably many, many more by now. She's inspired by her day job as a physician, researcher, and medical educator. And Tammy now writes medical thrillers. So she's taken all that juicy experience, written a book about something that she could probably delve deep into. And her debut novel, Fatal Intent, was published in March of last year. We're excited to hear about that. We're excited to hear about you, your journey, and how it got here. So thank you, Tammy, for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's just get started by getting to know who you are as a young woman. Not who you are as a young woman, who you were as a young woman, what you liked, what you were passionate about then, who you saw yourself to be when you got older. Tell us about you as a younger woman so we can understand how you got to where you are.
Sure. I grew up in Central Florida, family of 5, very fortunate to have incredible parents. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was an engineer. We did a lot of talking around the table about how to solve the world's problems. And I was absolutely convinced my dad needed to be president because he knew everything. I think a lot of little girls think that.
Yes.
I was a very driven person. I always very competitive. I wanted to be the best at everything I did. And whatever I got involved in, I got sort of overly involved in. So music or sports or whatever.
Okay.
And I decided I wanted to do something to change the world because I just decided that that's what I was supposed to do. And I had no idea what that would be. So somewhere between an astronaut and curing cancer and, so I skipped my senior year of high school to get started in college and stopped playing music at that point and got involved in some medical research and played lots of intramurals and loved college, did well, decided that I would become a medical researcher. So I applied to medical school and in an MD PhD program and got in and pretty quickly realized I really didn't like killing rats and doing basic science research.
Really? Okay.
And wasn't 100% sure I wanted to be a doctor because my goal was to do medical research, not to practice medicine.
Yeah.
And was on the verge of dropping out when I talked to one of my attendings and he introduced me to someone else who introduced me to someone else. And I found a way to combine my love of engineering and medicine into full-scale patient simulation. It was being developed at University of Florida. And I was very fortunate to get to be part of the project and just fell in love with anesthesia because he was an anesthesiologist and really enjoyed what I was doing. Broke up with my long-term boyfriend, got together with my husband and my now husband, sort of it went from there. I became a doctor. I did medical research that was much more clinically oriented.
Okay.
Nothing that was going to change the world, but I got lots of patents and lots of papers and promotion, and was very involved in medical education. And my mentor, who was this just amazing older German man, I went to him and said, we need a textbook for medical students because we don't have one. And he said, okay, let's write one. And I was like, okay, you can do that. So he and I wrote a textbook for medical students. And it was the most amazing experience because he shared so much of his life and his world. And when we finished it, he said, why don't we write something else? And I just loved being with him. And I said, sure, what should we write? And he said, how about a murder mystery?
Really?
Really?
Okay.
A murder mystery with an 80-year-old German guy and me. Okay. Yeah. So we started it, and then he fell ill. Okay. And then my career trajectory was such that the next logical step was for me to amp up my administrative duties. And I just sort of did it because it was expected of me. And I became in charge of our residency program, which was 88 millennials. For 4 years each, going through their residency training with very little support in my office. And I did that for 5 years, and he passed away, and my sister had an illness. Fortunately, she recovered, and my daughter was about to graduate high school. And I was on our 15-year, I guess, anniversary. We went out to Arizona, and my husband and I were hiking. Okay. And I just had this epiphany. We were outside Sedona, and I don't know exactly what happened, but I vividly remember where we were on the hike when it suddenly occurred to me that I was doing what everybody else thought I should be doing. Wow. And not necessarily what played to my strengths, what I really enjoyed. Okay. And talked to him, came home, quit being the residency program director, quit being the director of obstetric anesthesia. Okay, just like that. Just like that. I wrapped up all my research, and I went down to 60% in the operating room, and I started writing. And just the change in my attitude about life was remarkable. And I wish I'd figured it out a little earlier, but then I wouldn't be where I am now if I done anything different. But yeah, it was terrific. So what happened? What happened in Sedona? Was it the sun? Was it what was it that just made you say, okay? I do know that a few months before, I was walking on the beach with my eldest daughter, who was at that time a junior in high school, applying to colleges. And I was asking her what she wanted to be. And she was, engineer, this or that. And I said, did you ever consider being a doctor? Not wanting to push her into it. I was just curious if she'd considered it. And she said, you hate your job. Why would I do that? And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't hate my job. Yeah. Why did she say that? Yeah. Well, and I asked her about it, and she said that I come home unhappy so often, but it was never because I didn't like being a doctor. It was because I didn't like dealing with the 10% of people who cause 90% of the problems. And I just couldn't get my head around why somebody would be mean to nurses. And then I'm the one who has to try to be their personality coach and explain to them that that's just not the way you speak to people. And they just don't get it. And if you haven't figured it out by the time you're 25, you probably aren't. So, so that was part of it, was realizing that the impression I was giving to others was not okay. Well, I guess realizing that she was right. I was unhappy a large part of the time, and it was coming home with me, which was not the goal. Okay. Interesting. So I don't know what specifically happened on that trip. Okay. We were up in Sedona, where they've got all the crystals and the magnetic fields and stuff, which my husband and I just joke about. Yeah. But it was definitely while we were hiking there that because I had been asked maybe 6 months earlier if I was going to quit being program director, because they finally hired me an assistant. And I said, oh no, he's just here to be my assistant. And then 6 months later, I'm going, on second thought, I'm not here. Now, did anybody push back? What did people say when you came in and said, okay, I'm all done? Were they like, no, you're crazy? Out that my chairman, who was also a woman, decided not to be chairman either about the same time I did. So that was poor timing on my part. But no, I really didn't get very much pushback, almost disappointingly little pushback, to the point where I was like, maybe they all thought I was doing a bad job. But no, I think it turns out that the turnover for that position, residency program director, around the country is about 2.6 years is how long people make it. So
Wow.
me making it 5 years was actually quite good.
You hung in there for a long time. Okay. Yes. And your husband was good with this switch? Did he feel as well? Okay.
Completely supportive. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
very much so. He wasn't so interested in my writing. Like, he doesn't read what I write, and he doesn't
Okay.
understand that passion at all. But he's supportive of it and doesn't
Okay.
in any way discourage me from doing it.
Yeah, he doesn't feel like it's a step down or, why are you lowering yourself? Because doctors are a big deal. And so when you start to do something more artsy, they may think, why?
Well, he's a PhD.
Okay.
And I think it always bothered him that I was considered more of a doctor than he was, even though his
Right.
training is just as much as mine. But,
Yeah.
the society doesn't treat them quite on the same level. And when I would go to meetings to do presentations, they would call him Mr., and he didn't like that.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. That's a thing.
Whereas I didn't care at all if we went to meetings and he was presenting and I was called Mrs. It didn't bother me at all. But
Right.
we were very blessed financially that, physicians are reasonably well paid in academia, not as well as in the real world, but we aren't big spenders. So we were fine, even though my salary was cut in half, and and he was still working. So yeah, we did okay with that.
Okay. It was a good balance and you're both on the same page. That's wonderful. And when you made the switch, I assume you were older. About what age was that you made the switch? Was it very recent?
It was, it was 7 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Wow.
I was almost 50.
Wow. Okay. And so now tell us what you're doing now. Give us some more meat about what that is.
So now I work 3 days a week at the hospital.
Okay.
So I do primarily obstetric anesthesia. So I'm taking care of pregnant women,
Okay.
2 or 3 days a week, teaching residents, teaching medical students, and interacting a lot with the patients directly and the nurses. And then the other 2 days a week, I'm writing, playing with my dogs and writing. All 3 kids are now in graduate school, so they're not home anymore. And, doing all the usual stuff you have to do to keep your house and your family together. And my parents are a little bit older and live in town, so I do some things to take care of them or help them. But I get a good 2 days a week to write medical thrillers.
Okay.
And the other things that go along with being a published author, publicity stuff that I hate.
Oh, okay.
And even on the weekends, I still write. And my husband and I, now with empty nesting, are still sort of navigating that new world. And so I'm learning to play golf and tennis. And I get up and go to the gym most mornings and cook dinner. So in a lot of ways, it's just a normal life. And in a lot of ways, it's just the perfect combination of where I could be right now.
Okay. I was going to ask if you feel like that's a better balance. If you could do it earlier, would you have done it earlier? Or does this just feel like that perfect section of time where this was supposed to happen?
I always wonder about that when I have a regret about something. And then I think, would I be where I am now if that hadn't happened? And if I hadn't done that, even though it was wrong what I did, breaking up with somebody unkindly or whatever.
Right.
So in that respect, no. But if I could have had less stress in my life earlier, I don't know. I think it would have been better for me and for my family, but I don't know that I wouldn't have regretted it if I hadn't made full professor and didn't have the resume that I have, even though in the long run it matters zero. But it's the way I grew up, was with certain goals. And had I not attained them, I might have felt like something was missing.
Right. Yes, I get that. Yes. So this mentor that you talked about, the German gentleman, tell us about him. How did he help you and inspire you? Why do you call him mentor?
He, when I was I was in my last couple of years of medical school and I got involved with the simulator project. He was sort of the head of that. He wasn't the hands-on person, but it was his idea to begin with. And so I met him then, and he was the kind of person who, when you're talking to him, he's looking you directly in the eye, and he is clearly completely engaged in what you're talking about. And somehow he just exudes this, you are the smartest person I've spoken to, and this conversation is thrilling. But he does that with everybody. It wasn't that I was, it was just that, but he made me feel that way.
Yes.
And you know,
personal.
like people say that's more important when you make a friend, how you make them feel than how smart you appear or whatever. And he was just the epitome of that without any training in it, as far as I know.
Right.
But he would constantly ask me, what do I want out of my career? And then he would help me get there. I wanted to be involved in simulation, and he pulled some strings, and I became the editor of a journal on simulation.
Okay.
I mean, what brand new anesthesia, you know, so part of it was luck of the draw and coincidence, and I managed to get in the right opportunities. But he was just so willing to give of his time and his effort. And as long as I was enthusiastic and involved, he lapped it up and would do whatever it took to keep me engaged, and was very positive about everything. I'd give a lecture and he would come and he would sit there rapt. And then afterwards he would tell me what I did right. And then he had ways of saying, here's how you can make it better. That didn't sound like he was being critical. It was how to make it better.
Yeah.
All things that I wish to emulate and can't possibly do as well as he did.
Right. It's a gift. It really is a gift.
It really is.
Yeah. And to make it not seem like I'm just faking it to make you feel good, but that was who he was. Yes. Yeah. So you talked about emulating that in your life. Do you feel like you, do you purposely go out and seek women or young men to do that with? I
have recently I have done it more. Okay. I went through a period where I got very disillusioned with, you know, you try to help people and then they don't follow through, you know. Yeah. Young faculty would come to me and say, you know, I really want to get promoted and here's what I'm doing. And I would say, well, these are the things that it takes to get promoted. Not stuff I was making up, not stuff that helped me, just, you know, do this research that you want to do. Bring me your protocol. I'll be happy to edit it for you. We'll get it through the IRB, whatever. Just never do it.
Nothing. Okay.
And so I got frustrated with investing the time and having the other people not really be
not invested in their own follow
careers.
Through. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So very few anesthesiologists at my institution go the tenure route now. They just go the clinical route, which involves much less research, and you don't have to have as many lectures, and which is wonderful if that's what they want. Absolutely. And so my guidance has turned more into how do you balance your life, sort of ways to be a great mom when you don't have as many hours at home, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask next. Is the female physicians, I imagine they have different challenges. Not that they're easier or harder, but different. Do you have people asking, how did you do it? Because you did.
I do. And I asked a lot of those questions when I was in that position, and I was disappointed that I didn't get very much feedback, because back then I think it was less respected that you would not be just a career woman. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom, so I was blazing new trails in my own mind and feeling guilty because my mom was a stay-at-home mom and I wasn't.
And you're not completely,
So the main things I tell the younger people coming after are the things I think I did right. Based on my kids now still remember them and appreciate that I did certain things. And so I'm very much, do it your own way, but here are the things I think I did right. And here are the things I think I did wrong. So things I invested time in that didn't turn out to be worth it. Okay. And I was doing it more because the Tide commercial looks like I should have white curtains, and not because I really want white curtains, and gee, they get dirty.
I hear you. Yes. So what are some of those things that you did right? Give us one or two if you can pull them out.
So I think the most important one is I went to 80%, which means I had one day off a week very early in my career. And it wasn't the best move for rapidly advancing to full professor, but by far it was the best thing I did. And in fact, I've talked about it so much that many of my male colleagues are doing it too, which I think is interesting. And what I did with that day is I actually took it as 2 half days. So I was still at the hospital every day, but 2 days a week, I would leave early, pick up one child. I have 3 children, one child from school, and that was their mommy day. And so we would
Oh, that's
spend
fantastic.
2 or 3 hours on a mommy kid date. It was never something expensive. We would go walk around the zoo, or we would go throw a frisbee, or we would go sit at the bookstore and read a book together in a big chair.
Yeah.
But I did that from when they were in preschool, and they still talk about their mommy days. And I did it all the way up until they were in middle school.
That's a fantastic tip.
That was, I think, the best thing I did. And then the other thing I think was very important was my husband and I made a commitment to have one date night a week. And so what we said was we joined a softball team through our church, and it was Thursday nights, and every Thursday night. So it wasn't a matter of, oh, maybe we should try and go Wednesday. Let's try and find a sitter. We had the same sitter who came at 6:00 every Thursday. And we went out, even if it was just, the game got rained out and we just went to a restaurant or we went somewhere.
Yeah.
And so if we wanted to go with another couple, we could tell them, we're going Thursday. You find a sitter. We already have ours.
Yeah.
And I think that helped us maintain a strong marriage, which I think is huge for kids to have a happy, stable family.
It is. Yes. It's important for kids. It's important for you because, even just being married with children, you can drift apart, always talking about the children and always talking about the stuff.
And we did have a rule that after the first half hour, we couldn't talk about the kids anymore.
Beautiful. Yes. But those are 2 incredible tips because you could feel guilty or you can start to feel like I need to work. So sorry, kids, I'll see you next year. And you can say that to your husband too, and just get in the grind of acting and getting things done. So those are beautiful tips. I hope everybody's listening, no matter what age you are, you still have relationships. Even if you're not married, you have girlfriends, spend some time with them. I always hope to have at least 1 or 2 girlfriends when I'm 80 to be able to rock in the chair with me and say, you remember that, but if you spend all your time working with your head down, you just won't have it. Yeah. So beautiful tips. I love those. I wish I had done that purposely. Those mommy days I tried, but I didn't do it regularly like that. Valuable. Even
and
like
the one kid at a time is also really big.
Yeah.
If you take them all out, the dynamic is completely different.
Yes. Yeah. And you don't get that bond one-on-one, and they get their special time and they get to tell you that thing, whatever comes out. Sometimes things just come out. Yes. Yes. So tell us about your book, because I'm dying to know about your book. It has been published, so you can give us a little nugget, not too much so we don't read the book, but enough so we can get excited.
So Fatal Intent, which when I wrote it was called Do No Harm, but publishers choose different titles.
Yes.
Came out of an interest of mine since grade school, actually. When I was in grade school was when Karen Ann Quinlan, if you might remember her, she was a sort of brain dead, to use a little bit of a crass term, young woman whose family was fighting over whether to disconnect her from life support and stop tube feeds and let her die. Yeah. And so as just a kid, that was a debate we had in my class. I don't know if they would even let kids do that nowadays, but that was the debate we had. I have no idea what opinion I had, but I remember that we discussed it.
Yeah.
And then when I was in medical school, I went through a very atheist phase of my life. I'd been raised Catholic, and I had a very firm opinion. And I remember I wrote an essay about when it's time for somebody to go, you just call the family, let them come say goodbye, and then you kill them. It was very black and white to me. I just had no qualms about that. Right. And then, of course, you mature a little bit and you realize there's a lot more gray in the world. And so it was just a continuing fascination with me, is how should life end when theoretically it's no longer worth living, given that who gets to decide that and those sorts of things. But so I decided to write a book in which that becomes one of the themes without deciding what the answer is. I really love these ethically murky areas where I like the challenge of trying to come up with a very cogent argument on 180-degree opposite sides. And so that's sort of what I try to do. I try to come up with characters who people will care about, but who believe something completely different than another character that you care about. Right. And so that's sort of what this is about. It's about an anesthesiologist who uncovers basically a mercy killer for hire scheme and is trying, it's not being done in a kind way. And she's trying to stop that, and then discovers that her husband, who was in a a persistent vegetative state from a brain injury is going to be one of the next victims targeted by this man. So it was very fun. My husband thinks that he's the one who died and I'm the main character. And so he thinks it's really awful that I killed him off.
No, yeah, don't take it personally.
It's not me.
Not you. So how did you go from writing a medical book, a educational medical book, to fiction? And was that hard to make the jump? And was it hard as a physician to not be technical and less artistic?
Those are superb questions. So the jump was because my advisor, Dr. Gravenstein, said, let's try and do this. And we started doing it. And I wrote a scene and then I gave it to him and he went, this isn't actually what I had in mind. And then I go back and read the scene and I go, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And so when I finally sat down after he passed away and decided I really wanted to write a book, I realized that reading is not the same as writing. And writing fiction has very little in common with writing medical articles. Right. So even things that I should know, like point of view and how to construct a scene and what a character arc is, I learned those in school, but learning them by reading Jane Eyre is very different than trying to sit down and write it. And so the first thing I had to do was step back and be humble enough to go, you know what, I'm smart, but I'm not smart in this area. And just choose to be curious and learn. So I went to Amazon and I thought, there will be 5 books on writing. I'll just pick one. There's hundreds of books on writing.
So how did you pick one? How did you end up getting?
I went with the 5 stars that I could get on Kindle. And then I went for one on plotting because that was the thing I decided I needed first. And so there's one, K.M. Wayland, Weiland, writes a big series of books, but one of them is on plotting. And I just went step by step through her formula, sort of. And that's not where I ended up, but it was a great place to start. And then I just started taking classes, lots of online classes. And I went to a couple meetings and I went to some lectures and it was so fun. As somebody who had spent such a long time as a doctor, I always learn, right? As a physician, you're always having to keep up with the literature and learn new things. But I had such a structure to put that new knowledge on, and to start over with no structure was so fun once I wasn't humbled by the fact that I was being taught by people half my age. And I really have enjoyed learning it. And now I know it enough to help teach people coming up, but yet I still have so much to learn.
That's cool.
So it's really fun. I read very quickly, but I don't read very critically. I just enjoy a book. I enjoy a book and I get completely absorbed. And then afterwards I go, dang it, I forgot to pay attention to how they drew their scenery or how they describe the character. And then I have to go back and try to start over, and then I get involved again. And so it's a challenge for me, certain parts of it, especially description, because I don't really like to read it and I don't write it well. That part is something I still spend a lot of time on. But, and it's anesthesia is a fairly isolated profession. As an anesthesiologist, you're usually the only one in the room that's an anesthesiologist, right? There's a surgeon there and they may or may not be someone that you can talk to, but people are fairly focused in the operating rooms, and you have such a short relationship with your patient. And writing is also a fairly solitary exercise. When you're writing, you generally are alone. And then it's also can be fairly tough on your heart, right? So you spend all this time writing something and you give it to somebody and they go, not interested. And that's, it's your baby at that point. So you have to have some thick skin. And the difference, a huge difference for me, was when I was going into medicine, I knew that if I worked hard enough, I would succeed. I knew that if I wrote this paper well enough and accepted all this criticism, it would eventually get published. I could write a fiction book forever and no one ever read it. So that was really a challenge for me to know that no matter how hard I worked, I might not ever get published. But then there's self-publishing, which is 100% reasonable. It's just not what I wanted to do.
Yes. So did you have to go through a lot of those generations of go back to the table and write it, and then you back and forth and back and forth, and were you just as determined and said, listen, I'm going to get this published, so I'm going to go back to the table,
I finished it. I got criticism that was useful. I rewrote it. I changed it from multiple points of view to a single point of view so I could learn better how to do that. I got rejected. Somebody suggested that I write a short story. And so I did that. I don't read short stories at all, so I had no idea what to do with that. But I wrote a couple, finally got one published. And so you get that little
that little boost. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I sort of gave up on Fatal Intent and wrote a different book that I really enjoyed.
Okay.
But then I couldn't get that one picked up either. Yeah. And then I volunteered at a meeting to moderate a panel on medical writers.
Okay.
And on that panel was a woman who's multiply published in medical thrillers and actually she runs Ocean View, the place that eventually published my book.
Your book, yeah.
They don't accept manuscripts from unagented people unless you know one of their other authors and they suggest it. And so while I was doing the panel, I mentioned to her that I had a book, and she goes, "Oh, send it to me." And I did. And a few months later, she called and said, "We'd love to publish it." So
fantastic.
I still don't have an agent, but I did get, it's all that. So as a bit of an introvert, putting myself out there, right? Going to a meeting and volunteering to be, and then being sort of brave enough to walk up to this stranger and say, "Oh, by the way, I have a book." Those are all things that don't come naturally to me, but I was encouraged to try, and it's worked out.
And it paid off, and you got in front of the right person who understand your genre.
Right.
And they were ready to go with it. That's awesome. And now you mentioned that you're an introvert. Introvert and medicine, do those marry well? Or
they do. There are a lot of introverts in medicine, I think.
Okay.
A lot of analytical people tend to be introverts, I think, engineers and things like that. And especially in anesthesia, we get a lot of people with an engineering background because it's all physiology and math and sciencey stuff. I'm not sure they do as well in internal medicine or something like that, where there's a lot more talking.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. I never put those two together or even thought about it. So that was really interesting because, when I think of medicine, I think of the big, probably from the TV shows, the big ego talker, I'm out there kind of guy. Yeah.
Yes. That is not
real. It's TV.
It's probably true of surgeons and maybe, trauma kind of people, but a lot of us are very much more sort of cerebral and thinking more than talking.
Yeah, because it takes a lot of focus and to take all that knowledge and actualize it. I imagine you can't be too outside yourself. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you met your younger self today, what is the one piece of advice you would give her?
I think I would tell her not to take herself too seriously.
Okay.
That my dad would always say, keep things in perspective. And I always thought that meant he just didn't understand. But to take that for real, you are not the first ever to land on the planet. And
yes, that's a good point. Yeah.
And it's that when I think I was in my 30s before I realized that my life was my own and it was going to be what I made of it. And that the way I perceived things was up to me.
Okay.
And it wasn't somebody else's fault if I had a bad day. It was because I chose to interpret things in a way that made it a bad day. Yeah. And that was a huge epiphany for me. And just not thinking everything was so serious and directed directly at me. It just happened. The lady in the grocery store wasn't sneering at me. She was having a bad day, whatever, but it wasn't directed at me. And when you take all that in as if the whole world is thinking about you,
yes,
aren't. However,
it reminds me
of that. They aren't.
They aren't thinking about you. It's not about you. Yes, it reminds me of that song. You're so vain.
Yes,
you probably think this song is about you.
That's exactly right.
Every time it happens to me, I think of that song and I'm like, yeah, it's not about you, Julia. Give me a break. But that's an important thing. But why do you think it took you till 30 to learn it? Was just growing up? And it was just one time you're like, you know what, that guy's not upset because of me. I didn't do anything. It's his problem.
I don't know why it took me so long. I think it took me that long to get in a stable sort of path in my life, between school and academics and getting married and all those sorts of things. I think I just was very insecure for no reason, right? I mean, most people are insecure for no reason.
Most people, yes.
Right. And, the imposter syndrome sort of stuff. And I think it took me until my 30s before I went, you know what, I'm enough.
Yes. Yes. And a lot of us take a lot longer than that. So I don't think that was a long time at all. I think it took me longer than that. So that's pretty good. So give us some advice from your playbook. What is one book you would advise all women to read?
So I actually thought about this in advance.
Okay.
And I'm debating between a couple of different books, but the one that most recently really resonated with me is called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals.
Yes.
Have you read it?
No, I haven't, but I have seen it. Yeah.
It's by Oliver Burkeman. And it's completely different than every time management book I ever read, because I read a bunch of them when I was program director and totally out of hours. And he talks about basically giving up on trying to do it all, which is so empowering to go, you know what? 4,000 weeks is how many weeks you have if you live to be 80. Okay. And so basically what his point is those are all you got. And if you decide to spend them doing, another 100 emails, then you're choosing that over something else. And so be careful what you choose, because saying yes to one thing is saying no to something else, even if it's not a conscious no. And I think it's a fabulous book. In fact, I got the audiobook and I finished it and I started it over again right away, which is unheard of for me to ever listen to a book twice. But I just thought it was really, really good. So I highly recommend it. It's not very long.
It was good not only for the tips he gave you, was there inspiration in there that sort of geared you on what to do instead of other things?
And it's a little bit of Stoic philosophy, which I've started reading within the last couple of years about, he calls it finitude, which is this whole concept that you don't have forever. You don't have unlimited resources, unlimited time. And in Stoic philosophy, they say, imagine the worst, so imagine that your husband dies tomorrow, which is a horrible thing to have to think through. But then you go, wow, I would really miss him. I need to appreciate him more instead of waiting until, the diagnosis or whatever it is, where you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe So actually putting yourself through those exercises is probably worthwhile.
Yes. And I hope that all of the listeners hear that finitude. Is that what you call it?
That's the term he uses. I don't know if he made it up.
Right. Yes. Because you don't know how much time you have. I know a friend of mine that I work with, her husband one morning was just gone. He passed away. And so you imagine that the night before you went to sleep and you told him he was stupid and I don't want to talk to you, whatever, all the things you wanted to say and all the things you wanted to do. We're always waiting to retire, but who told you you're going to make it to retirement? Do it now. Yeah. We want to dream like we're going to be alive till 80, but do it now and do the important things now. So I think that's going to be a good book to read. I'm going to look for it as well.
Good.
So tell us one thing that you can't miss doing every day.
Well, the easy answer is hugging my husband, but that's
okay. Cheating. I love that. No, that's perfect. I'm sure 90% of women don't do that, Sorry to say, I have no statistic on that, but I imagine, you, like you were just saying, you just take people for granted and I'll hug you later. I got to go. I'm in a hurry. So yeah, that's beautiful. I'm going to do that starting tomorrow. I'm going to think of you and say, yes, don't forget the hug. You don't know what's going to happen during the day if you're making home after work or whatever. So 2 more questions. One is, how can the listeners get in touch with you after this podcast is over?
The easiest way is with my website, which is just my first initial and last name, Euliano.com. And there's a contact form at the end. I have a newsletter that goes out about every other month. That's mostly stuff about me and my books and whatever, my family and what cool stuff I've read lately or whatever. Yes. And then, people sometimes email me questions and I'm happy to answer them.
Okay. I had another question that popped in my head. It popped out. Let me see. It was just a random question. And I hate when that happens. It's gone,
I do that all the time.
Completely gone. Maybe it'll come back to me. But the other question I wanted to ask is, you, Tammy, have been given a message from God, and he says, okay, this is the last day you're going to be on earth. Give the world the one message that you want to leave it. What would that be?
Oh my goodness. Gosh, I guess I would say be kind to each other. It's the world we're in right now is just so sad, and it's just not necessary.
Right. Yes.
So find a way every day to make somebody else smile.
Yes. Because if we are all making somebody else smile, somebody will be making you smile, and everybody's smiling. It's that difficult and that simple.
And it feels so good. It's remarkable to me how if I get sort of nasty on the phone with somebody who frustrates me, I feel bad the rest of the day.
Yes, you do. Yeah,
it
affects us.
And if I go out of my way to do something extra nice for a patient or somebody at the grocery store or whatever, then I feel good the rest of the day. And so I guess it's selfish, but it's also, I think we're built that way.
We are, yes. It's a world community, and it's almost like it just spreads. Whatever you give comes right back around to you. I believe that. And I have felt that too. So yes. So thank you for the message for the world. And I don't remember that question. If I remember the question, I could be crazy because I was like, yes, I've got a doctor. What can I ask her? Oh, wait a minute. That was the question. Yes. So I have heard recently that a way to help dementia or Alzheimer's is by doing a lot of reading and using your mind. Have you ever heard anything like that? I wonder if that's true. I figured I'd just throw that on the table.
I haven't heard it about reading specifically, but absolutely continuing to use your mind is huge. And that's been absolutely shown that the easiest way to end up with dementia is to, I don't know about Alzheimer's specifically, but dementia in general is to, when people retire and they stop challenging themselves and they sit around watching the news or whatever, then that's when things start not working anymore. Like almost like it's a muscle, which of course it isn't, but has to be exercised.
Yes. And then I wonder about the young people who are doing a lot of computer gaming and, what do they call those things? Phone watching, and not a lot of difficult stimulation and challenging of the brain and creation.
Yeah, I almost wonder if video games are better than watching YouTube, right? Because at least you're trying to solve a puzzle and move to the next level and you're being alert. Whereas, watching TikTok is nothing.
Yes.
Right? That's jello.
Yes. That's a good term. It's like mind jello. Yes. I love it. I'm going to use that every time I see somebody doing too much TikTok. You're just eating mind jello. Oh my goodness. Yes, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being here, and good luck and God bless with the books.
Thank you. Yeah,
everybody.
The paperback, I guess, will be out by the time this comes out. And then the sequel, Misfire, comes out in January of 23. So
nice.
Stay tuned.
Yes. And I love that it's a book that from different perspectives, and you love the characters, and it'll make you think. It'll help you with your dementia.
That's right.
But yes, seriously, we look forward to your books, and I encourage everyone to get linked up with you so they get information when the books come out. And I love a good thriller. My husband loves them, so I'm going to have to get him the book. So thank you, Tammy.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the F50 Woman podcast. Join the F50 Woman movement and this diverse group of voices to help change the world one woman at a time. Why should you join at your age? Because we're not done yet.